This podcast is brought to you by OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, the advocacy body for professional engineers in the engineering community in Ontario.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining a very special live episode of Engineering the Future. I am your host, Jerome James. Tonight, we are celebrating International Women in Engineering Day by speaking with three remarkable OSPE members. The first is Marilyn Powers, OSPE's Vice Chair. The second is Beatrice Sze, OSPE Research and Innovation Task Force Member. And the third is Lauren Briens, OSPE Diversity and Inclusion Task Force Member. Thank you all for being here. For everyone tuning in, please feel free to submit questions about our special guests, directed to our special guests, and we will try to get to them towards the end of our broadcast. You can submit questions by typing it into the comment section. And without further ado, let's get right into the thick of it. The first question, we're going to start off with Marilyn. Thank you all for being here, by the way. For everyone, sorry, we'll get right into it here. It's when you're live. So Marilyn, can you tell us a bit about why you decided to become an engineer? I know from your background, you did your Ph.D. at U of C out west. Are you originally from the prairies?
No, I'm originally from Southern Ontario, a farming community somewhere between Chatham, Sarnia, and London. I had a lot of messages when I was growing up about math is good and computers are good. And sometime right at the end of my high school, somebody said, well, if you like both of them, why aren't you doing engineering? And I was like, I don't know, what is that? And so that just started kind of a whirlwind of like, well, maybe I should apply. And I got accepted to the University of Waterloo in civil engineering. That's where I started. And I'm still trying to figure out engineering. So they started talking about how you could mix like being a doctor with engineering. And I was like, that's super cool. And so I started studying human body mechanics and things like that. So I ended up in, biomechanics, biomedical. My PhD is, it was done half in the University of Calgary and half at École Polytechnique in Quebec. So been an engineer in all three provinces, which has been pretty exciting.
Amazing. So yeah, you saw that there was opportunities to mix your sense of wonder and whatnot, and being able to express that through engineering. That's great. Beatrice, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into engineering?
Yeah, sure. So like Marilyn, when I was younger, I really liked solving problems, whether it was technical, whether it was building robots in my parents' basement with my friends, and then trying to raise money so that we could continue to build robots in my parents' basement, or interpersonal, which meant how do we, deal with the disagreements about how we should be building robots in my parents' basement. So, with all of that enthusiasm and resiliency, I guess, engineering seemed like a natural place for those who like to problem solve. Fast forward to, I guess, working, like after graduation, after I was licensed, I was working in the nuclear industry in Canada on CANDU reactors. I won't bore with the details, but it's a very regulated, it's a highly technical, but it's also very regulated field. So you needed to have fluency in both electromechanical systems that you're designing, whatever your machinery is or your system is, but also you needed to understand the regulations, particularly the safety regulations that you had to comply with to ensure that your technical work product and process met the standards that the CNSE set. So going into law, that was sort of the natural lead-in for me to go into law, because intellectual property was heavily involved in our work, as well as the actual regulation of the technical aspects of what we were doing. So
Right.
That's how I found myself with the JD and then practicing law a few years later.
And last but not least, Lauren, if you could tell us a little bit about your the process that you followed, and maybe a little bit about the hurdles that you've experienced along the way. Uh, it seems like Marilyn and Beatrice had smooth sailing the whole way, but
Yeah,
you can tell us the truth.
I didn't know right away I wanted engineering. So my first degree is actually not in engineering. It's I have a honors 4-year honors science degree in biochemistry that I started and completed right after high school. And it was towards the end of that degree that I started looking around. So now practicality sets in, and like, okay, I love my degree, but what am I going to do with it? And I didn't like the opportunities I saw with my science degree, but my friends who were doing engineering degrees and the careers that they were going on to do afterwards were a lot more appealing. And so I started a second degree in engineering at that time. Hurdles would probably be talking to my parents about doing another undergraduate degree. And keeping on going in school. And they had in mind that I should have been a physician, and I was changing course now. And so there were some personal hurdles, some family hurdles, and just sort of shifting my pathway took some courage.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Um, you touched on this briefly, Beatrice, about your integration of law and engineering. Can you expand on that a little bit more and how it shaped your career path?
Sure. I get asked this a lot, and it's not an easy one to convey, or I haven't found the way to convey it like succinctly in a sound bite. But I would say engineers and lawyers actually have a lot in common. Engineers apply the laws of physics. That's these guys here, these books. And then lawyers apply the laws of man. That's these books here. Right? And, so there are two very analytical groups of people. But what I would say is, like, engineers are fantastic at solving problems, but they're not always great, or at least current engineering education isn't great at teaching them how to decide which problems to solve. And that's something that I learned a lot in law school. Issue identification, folks with the liberal arts and humanities background, they spend a lot of time studying history, economics, understanding what values we should be valuing as a society, what different groups of communities value, and what worked for them. So I kind of accidentally stumbled into that skill set, and I have found great respect for it. And now that I'm, the last 6 years or so, I've been merging the two. And I currently work for the federal government, where I'm using both every day to serve Canadians. It's quite a ride. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I've expanded a little bit. Feel free to probe.
No, excellent. No, it's great to see that you're multifaceted and you like to see things from different perspectives, and found a way to integrate them into your vocation, which is great.
And I'm finding, if I may, just a little plug for any students watching, that a lot of the problems that classical engineers are being asked to work on in industry, like private sector, are requiring more of that integration, because computation has gotten so powerful that so much of what even I was doing right out of school, when we were doing design work, ANSYS, and all that finite analysis, we've got programs and technology that will just do it much faster and much more reliably. So then the human involved, the human technologist, is being asked to consider which problems to solve. Are we doing it correctly? How are we innovating in a responsible way? I mean, these are things that we weren't really educated on, but are being asked of our engineers, I'm finding these days. So
Absolutely. Shifting back to Marilyn for a moment. Oh, absolutely. I think we all can agree on that point. Can you point to Marilyn? Can you expand on that idea and point to some role models that helped you along your career path, and maybe elaborate more on the type of high tech work that you've done in the past,
Right.
and expand that.
So I really think the engineering degree is a fantastic degree for solving problems that really sets you up to do a lot of things. And so I did end up, like, right now I'm the director of academic technology integration and innovation at Mohawk College, where I'm looking at problems that exist in how do we deliver online learning? How do we help faculty deliver in this remote world that we're in right now? And even as we come out of the pandemic, what should education look like? But that is like, it finally feels like everything came together. But throughout my career, I certainly didn't feel like everything was coming together. I started out in engineering. Like I said, I wanted to apply it to mechanics of the body. I went and studied that, and then found out there really wasn't an employment opportunity in Canada for that. If I wanted to do biomechanics, I really had to move to like Warsaw, Indiana, or Switzerland. So those were the two choices. And I didn't really get that when I started into that there would be really nothing out there. And I stumbled into teaching, right? I started teaching engineering and was like, this is fantastic. I was at Mount Royal College, and I said, this is what I want to do. How do I like become full-time? And they said, well, you need a PhD because we're going to be a university we're applying. And so that kind of brought me along. And I wouldn't say so I go and I start the PhD, and then because of life circumstances, I end up moving to Montreal, trying to finish a PhD. I've got a toddler and a baby at that time, trying to figure out how to manage all of that. And ended up finished my PhD, did a postdoc in my field, which was this intersection between teaching and engineering. So I was designing robots that give force feedback so that you can do simulations in virtual reality. So really fascinating kind of thing. Again, very tiny market in Canada to do that. I didn't want to move elsewhere. Family situation. I didn't really want to uproot everybody. And so along the way, I had various mentors that helped me to the next step and to the next level. I had great mentors when I went from that postdoc into business. So I worked at CAE, and in there, I was asked to basically start up as an entrepreneur the CAE Healthcare, which is now a thriving business, and a big part of CAE. But I had business mentors at that point, right? Like, they were engineers, but they really taught me how to scale, because I was really good at estimating. Well, it would take me like this many days to do that and this, but they had 400 engineers to do parts of that. So I was like, I don't know how to scale that. Like, I don't know how to distribute that kind of workforce across there. So, and I continued to kind of go in that realm, but I've had different mentors at every step. So sometimes they're business mentors, sometimes they're engineering mentors, sometimes they're, organizational development mentors, right? Because once you're in business, you got to figure out how to motivate your team and mobilize your team. So no one in particular, just lots of good ones along the way, and that really helped take me to that next level.
Yeah.
And Beatrice, if you wanted to jump in on that,
Marilyn, thanks for sharing your story. I think that's great. It's super inspiring to me, and I have a lot of young professionals and students in my network now, sort of just at that stage where I'm sort of not really formally teaching, but becoming that person that folks ask for advice. And it's always great to meet women who've started their own businesses and kind of done their own thing, to learn how that works. And how did you, I guess my question on behalf of them, if they were here, how did you go out and find the expertise that you didn't have, or the mentors that you didn't know you needed? Because if you had them, you would already, be up and running, I presume. So when you were in the grind, and you were trying to do something new and hadn't quite actualized yet, how did you go about seeking mentorship? Or how did they find you? Like, what did you do to put yourself out there? Because at some point you had to ask for help and not be perfect and admit that you didn't have it all. Right. And
Cold calling.
You had to do everything perfectly, going from that mentality to saying, I don't know something and I need to admit that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all about staying curious and asking those questions. And then seeing where you can get answers. So actually reaching out to people, you have no idea who they are and they don't know you. And what I've learned is people are very generous. So they, if they think they can help you and they think you want the help, they're very generous at giving that time. I am as well. I've had lots of people who tend to say, well, I think a good person to talk to would be Marilyn. And they'll just meet with me and I'll just see if I can help them at all. I'll give them an hour of my time and maybe a few introductions to other people. And I think that's really how I've been able to kind of keep going. Everything I've done has come through a network connection of that sort.
That's great.
Excellent. This is very insightful already. Appreciate the in-depth candor that everyone is portraying right now. I wanted to go back to Dr. Lauren, who is a faculty member of engineering at Western University since 2001, my illustrious undergraduate alma mater. Just wanted to throw that out there for the conversation here. What do you think needs to change to make engineering more welcome, a more welcome place for women? And yeah,
That's a big question. I think we need to start with somehow increasing the numbers, and then that will have sort of a ripple effect. So in increasing the numbers, we have to start early and spark that interest in young children in engineering, and then nurture and grow it as they get older, recruit them into an undergraduate engineering education, and then once they're finished their education, support them in the workplace. And so if you get more and more women in engineering, you're going to have more and more opportunities for them to have those peer-to-peer relationships, to be able to find the mentors. So we were just talking about mentors a minute ago. And that was one of the challenges that I had, was that I didn't really have a mentor that I could easily relate to, because there weren't very many women in engineering and academia. So if we get more and more women there, some of those things will become easier. They'll make the workplace more welcoming. And so that's the next thing that we have to is get that career shift, that culture shift in the workplace. It needs to be more flexible, more conducive to a balanced lifestyle. And that needs to include if an individual wants to have a start and raise a family. And then when they're in the workplace, to make it welcoming. And there's a bunch of things that companies can do. Pay equity is one. Make sure that that's in place, and make sure that all of their engineers have equal opportunities to work on projects that are exciting, interesting, challenging, that are valued by the company, and make sure that the company then acknowledges that the work that they're doing is really important. So, but some of those things we need to grow and get those numbers and get to a critical mass so that all of those things become easier and just move themselves along more naturally.
Excellent. Did anyone else have any input on that one?
I would love to chime in a little bit too. So I think being able to see women who are engineers and what their work is like is important. I had the conversation with my 18-year-old daughter yesterday about, so what did you think? What did you think I did? And she didn't know. And she point blankly told me before grade 6, she had no care in the world what adults did for their life. She didn't want to know, which is interesting. But I didn't know what engineers did when I was trying to make that decision in high school. I had no idea. And I think these kinds of forums so that women can see, oh, okay, you can be in, like, I'm in education, Lauren's in education, but in a very different way, right? And Beatrice is a lawyer combined with an engineer. And then she just said that they're similar. And I was like, what? So
that's
very good.
I have a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I have a series. Yeah.
I'll let Beatrice chime in because I have a lot more ideas about how we can make the workplace, what has to happen in the workplace. But
yeah. I actually want to just ask a question to both of you, because you're both in academia and you are the first people, women of authority, I guess, or your curators of the environment that young girls enter when they go into engineering or they aspire to, if they're thinking about where to apply, right? So as members of that academic environment, are there any, are there any structural changes that you think could have made your lives easier? Marilyn, you mentioned you were doing such great research, like postdoc work, as well as I think starting business while being a mom. Is there anyone? I'm kind of, it's a leading question, but there are, who's not at the table is something I always ask. It's like there are always men who are at the table, and it's more than women who need to work on this problem. And so I would ask, from my observation in the private sector, encouraging men to take pat leave and also and rewarding them for being great fathers at home to whatever their partners do, whether it's science or whether art or whatever that may be.
That's a really great point, that allyship and the idea that this is not just a woman's game.
Or that
men
we
need to be a
like
part of. Yeah.
Like that. Was there anything that could have helped you through your lives as trailblazers to where you are now, to who are able to inspire, so that we can allow more folks like you to be in your environment too? I guess that's my question.
Mm-hmm.
Some flexibility would have helped.
Okay. Yeah.
That I, of course, didn't fit into the standard mold. So I have twin boys, and I had them as I was trying to finish my Ph.D. And so then had to be a little bit flexible in finishing the degree. And then when I started as a professor, a faculty member, a little bit more flexibility in terms of meetings, when I was able to work or not able to work, depending on if the children were sick and had to be home from daycare, or just a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of acknowledgement that, yeah, I was pulling my weight, but and putting in the hours and putting in the work, but not in necessarily a regular day.
Mm-hmm.
So flexibility helps a lot.
Another question for you. How do you find being assistant dean of first year studies? How has that changed your role or your influence? How do you find that allows? What does that allow you to do as a female leader at Western?
So it was a lot of administrative work. So switching from more research and teaching, and then having those scale back a little bit, and a lot more administrative work. And part of my responsibilities as assistant dean first year studies was to do the recruitment from high school into engineering. And so I put a lot of care, a lot of extra work into making sure we had a welcoming environment, going out to girls' schools, looking at our promotional material and making sure that they appealed to a wide audience, and looking at ways to just make it more attractive to a broader group of students.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we've talked about the idea of mentorship, but everyone's kind of being vague. I want each person to throw out a name and give a brief description or story about a mentor or someone that really helped them get over a hump in their experience going through to becoming an engineer. I want a name and an anecdote.
My dad. The first, he's an engineer, and so he's the first engineer I knew, and my first mentor, and has always is so inspiring, and just the way he tackles problems, his mindset, the way he his work ethic, and so he's my first mentor, and somebody I still go to for advice.
Excellent.
Not to be
Dr. Powers.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Marilyn. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're going to go to me. I was hoping you'd wait. I'm going to pick Guillaume Herbe. He was the president of CA Healthcare when I first started, and he really just helped me learn the business. He basically told me, this is your MBA. applied. And I don't have an MBA. But I did feel like I had to learn all of it in my first year there. And he was just very good at making sure I had the opportunities, making sure that my voice was heard, making sure that, that I was at the meetings that where the decisions were being made. And I think he was very influential, and still some of the things he taught me, I still use to this day in my current role, and he was military trained and then climbed the corporate ladder after that. Whereas, I'm in academia now, which is very different. So, and it still rings true, all of it.
Great. Beatrice?
Okay, just to bookend it, for me, it's my father as well. He was the engineer first in, I think, his family. Yep, first in his family and only, apart from me now. And he taught me how to tackle problems, and how to stay with it when the problems aren't quite solving, whether they're interpersonal, whether they're business, or whether they're technical. Just keep working it, and to take breaks. Right? If you are working a problem and it's really not getting anywhere, go for a walk. That was always something that he encouraged me about. So, yeah, definitely my dad.
All very excellent advice, and your mentors definitely served you all well. I hope everyone's enjoying this episode, live episode of Engineering the Future, celebrating International Women's Day and International Women in Engineering Day. If you have any questions, feel free to include them and submit them into the comment section. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. This episode of Engineering the Future is brought to you by Commonwealth. Traditional RRSPs can take a huge chunk of your savings in fees and don't help you answer key retirement questions. That is why OSPE has partnered with Commonwealth, a user-friendly digital retirement platform that offers a smarter way to save for retirement using RRSPs and TFSAs with fees that are about 60% less than what most Canadians pay. In just a few clicks, you can create a personalized retirement plan, including how much to save, what to expect from government benefits, and how to invest your savings. Save even more by transferring your existing RRSPs and TFSAs. For a limited time, Ospie members can get up to $250 in cash when you contribute to the plan. To see a demo or for more information, visit commonwealthretirement.com/engineers. We're back. Tonight, I'm speaking with 3 professional engineers and active volunteers and OSPE members, Dr. Marilyn Powers, Beatrice Sze, and Dr. Lauren Briens. We do have some questions from the audience. We're going to go to the first one right now. It is for Marilyn and Lauren. Do you have any advice on how to justify the Ph.D. experience for getting a P.Eng? Is there any possibility that how to justify research work, including postdocs that were more comprehensive and multidisciplinary, for getting the P.Eng. designation? I feel like they're interested in, they're wondering why you guys went the extra mile. Did it have any influence on your technical designation of P.Eng, or do you feel like it was a separate endeavor, more focused on, what other ideas versus practicing in engineering, or did the two come together?
So for me, I got my P.Eng. before I started a Ph.D. So it was separate. And at the time, I believe that my work as a Master's of Science student in engineering counted because I did it under another P.Eng. But that's a long time ago. So I know the rules changed, because back then it was less years that I had to put in. There was lots of co-op terms I had. So there was less, it was a bit of a different structure as to how to get it. I really thought that question was going into, do you justify a PhD? But it didn't. Lauren.
Yeah, so I got my P.Eng after my PhD. And Marilyn, you're correct. You can count. So I know this from my position as assistant dean, that you can count upper year, co-op or internship, and you can count 1 year of graduate school towards your experience for your P.Eng designation. To take some of my PhD experience and translate it into appropriate experience for my P.Eng. It was very valuable that some of my PhD work was done in collaboration with industry, with the company. I was helping them solve a problem. And so that helped with crossing over between the two.
Mhm.
Great. Moving
Yes.
right along.
Sorry.
Oh, by all
Yeah.
means.
It's on the spot because I'm thinking of my mentees. For those who are considering grad school or industry, and maybe more towards Marilyn, I guess, because she had a bit of both before going back into academia. What do you find fulfilling in both? Like, what did you enjoy about private sector, and what did you enjoy about a career in academia?
So my PhD was very much in a new area. So it was virtual reality surgical simulation. It was something you couldn't do in industry because it didn't exist yet. So it was really on the cusp of how do we put together a simulator. I did mine very much in haptics. I know a lot about bone drilling, probably more than I really wanted to. So the PhD was twofold. I wanted to be in academia, and two, it was in an area that there was no way to get into it otherwise. Mm-hmm. And that it steered me into a way where NSERC used to have industry-based postdocs, and that's what I did. So that was my transition, right? So my postdoc was in industry, which was phenomenal because that got me the skill set that needed to get hired into industry full time. Okay. So now, going back into academia, I was never in the research realm, right? Like I went to go down that route. I did not realize at the time how when a university posts a position for faculty, it is incredibly specific. So your research has to be in exactly that. And there were none that were in like virtual reality surgical simulation. And I was kind of skirting around it. But then I found success in industry. So I just dropped the idea of trying to make sure I got into academia. And then, 15 years down the road, virtual reality becomes something that people want to learn, and it's affordable for most people to try. So I got hired to teach in virtual reality and to start up a program in developing people who could work with virtual reality and start a program at Mohawk. So my experience isn't sort of the traditional PhD route in that respect, but having the scientific rigor and the understanding that methodology, and that has been very much relied upon throughout my entire career in that respect.
Excellent. Moving right along, we have another question from a student at Mohawk College in the Mechanical Engineering Technology program. It is so important to get more women into engineering, but I also see many not staying in because of the challenges they face. Do you have any suggestions to help with this?
So I think the conversation is broad, and it's not things that women themselves can necessarily do or be the only people at the table. Like you briefly mentioned before, more allies, more people at the table. The whole work with, equality, diversity, inclusion is hard work. And for engineering firms, I can see that it's incredibly hard. So if you look at what I keep hearing as a stereotypical engineer, because I've been told that I've actually been outright told there's no way you're an engineer, you're too personable. And I'm like, what do you mean? So there's those stereotypes, but so if we look at, I'm going to borrow that stereotype for a moment. If we look at the fact that if you think that all engineers are very just rational thinkers and they're just analytical, this kind of work is in the human realm. This is what Beatrice was talking about before. A lot of our work now has to be in the relationships and having hard discussions. Nobody teaches you how to have a difficult conversation. Nobody teaches you how to really like have those cordial but disagreeing, but we're still okay with everything discussions that need to be the focus of changing culture. And this is the culture of like an entire company. And you can't do that by just doing some like PowerPoint presentations and identifying, oh, there's this thing called unconscious bias. You should check it. You should check your own unconscious bias, which, is really hard. You actually have to have the hard conversations and give people space and time for that. And if you're focused as a company on productivity and efficiency, you're not going to be focusing on that. So I think there's a big conversation to be had about getting everyone at the table and talking about this in order to change culture that will make it more appealing to stay in.
Right.
Marilyn, you mentioned something that I've seen a lot in private sector. So I'll nod my head as the token non-PhD academic engineer, but a lowly bachelor's have I. But in my work as a solicitor and a barrister, I've worked with a lot of engineering companies who have been my clients at various stages of development, startups, and then Fortune 500s in a tech realm. And so I've seen a lot of you sort of become like a marriage counselor or like a team counselor. Every person who's now my client or my peer are the CEOs or the CTOs who are trying to figure out what their liability is or whether they can enter a market and compete, that kind of thing. How do they get their Series A and stuff like that? And so the problems at that level are very human. Why do we make the decisions we make? How do we decide which projects to invest in? And when the guys disagree, because it's still usually guys, when the guys are just disagreeing and they're hashing it out on which project, which solution is best, it's team red versus team blue. So often engineers are quite rigid thinkers and we're not always educated to be self-aware. Like we don't go through the humanities and the broad arc of history, and we study conflict, so that as a result, I find that in terms of being, conflict averse is something that I kind of notice more from the scientific community, which I say that's a bold statement to make to two academic educators, but I think it's something that I would love to see more of, because I see it in other jurisdictions and other, some colleges, I won't name them because they're workshopping it, but I know there are some schools in Ontario, engineering programs, where they're trying to sort of create these soft skills and kind of do away with the idea that these soft skills are less valuable or less worthy of respect than the hard skills that they're learning. Come out, and I see Lauren not like, I'm sure she's got insight because she's developing, she'll be at the forefront of this type of tautological research and papers on this type of thing. So,
so Beatrice, that's a really great example of engineers around the decision table clashing with the business folk, but specifically women around the decision table. Can you explain or give an example of an adversity that you've had to overcome in those discussions, and how gender played a role, and how you overcame that experience?
Yeah, sure. It's hard to talk about. I really lost a lot of sleep coming onto this podcast, I'll be honest. But I'll do my best. Just how do I convey so much of who I am authentically that's useful? Right. So in a lot of the professional roles I've played previously, and I can't get into too many specifics because as a lawyer, solicitor-client privilege is a big part of what I do. But in terms of the human dynamics, I've often been the youngest, usually the only visible minority, and often the one of only a few women. So I kind of got to punch way up and way above my weight class to talk about some fairly important things, because we're trying to decide with the founder of a company and somebody who's got a lot of money or threatening them to take money away. Like, these are very adult, these are very, serious business questions. We all take, it's very serious to the people involved, of course. And that's the unit of work, of course. It's just, you sort of get used to everyone taking everything seriously and become kind of like a counselor, But yeah, in terms of adversity, I think part of it is just letting all of that fall away. Don't see yourself in terms of those things. Define who you are. And I found that that's kind of worked for me. I run my own shop for a little while, and that was an incredibly freeing experience. And I'm sure, Marilyn will have a point of view too. Like, you're not necessarily a member of a company. You are literally your own professional with your own skills, and you can solve the problem. It's just you and the problem that's being asked of you, and your solution to it, your analysis, your ability to work the problem and pitch the solution and make it happen. Right? Whether it's arguing in court, settling for a client, help giving advice to a business leader on whether or not they can and can't do something, where they should or should not do something. These are all things that you can solve. And so just not letting yourself be defined by what you're not, and letting yourself focus on what you are and what you bring to the table. And then I've been called aggressively reasonable. That's my style. In that
I think that's a compliment. For sure.
Yeah, and be very Canadian. Be like, I think we can come to a compromise.
Great.
Yeah.
Lauren, I'd love to get your input on this topic as well.
I was shaking my head and agreeing with Beatrice that you have to be yourself. And some advice that I've always held true is to be brave. So being brave gives me the courage to try new ideas, try new things, to tried engineering in the first place when it was a difficult decision to do. And you look around. So to be brave, just sometimes to walk into a meeting, walk into a room, and you're the only person that looks like you. You look very different from everybody else in the room. Quite often they're all men. And to just have the courage to go, I belong here, and I'm going to be actively and engaging and participating in this discussion.
Exactly. Can you give us a little insight on first year numbers for women at Western the last few years, and how it's been changing or not changing?
So it has slowly been going up, of course, not as quickly as I would like it to increase. If I'm looking at our incoming first year class, there's going to be a little bit of movement over the summer, but we're looking at somewhere close to in and around 25%. So it certainly has moved up, definitely from when I was an undergraduate student. And so that's awesome. I would like it to go further. There's always room for improvement and room for growth upwards. But
is there still a distribution? Like, is there a concentration of women in the different disciplines, or is that?
Yeah, there always has been. It's starting to change. It's starting to even out. So when I was an undergraduate student and still now, chemical seemed to have quite a few women. Then there was civil, and some of the ones that didn't attract quite as many women were, say, electrical, mechanical, and that's starting to shift now. Mechanical and electrical are attracting more women. We do have scholarships. We do make an extra effort to attract women into some of those disciplines that they didn't traditionally go to, particularly electrical engineering. We have some initiatives.
Can you put a hard percentage number onto that, or is that privileged information?
Onto the
numbers of women, maybe just an overall percentage of like a first year class these days.
Oh, we're hoping for. It looks like we're be 25% this year at Western.
Oh wow!
Yes,
that's a lot higher than even when I went through. So, what was that?
Can I
15 years ago?
Yeah. Oh, really, Jerome? But I just had a thought before I'm sort of throwing sideways, or before we go forward. There was a point. I'm just doing it. I'm sorry, you're all looking at Beatrice. What are you doing? Story of my life. Anyway, one thing I wanted to leave for women to do something where you may not feel like you are in the majority, or we're reaching for 25%, as Lauren mentioned, and that's a great goal. So if you're a high school student thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to do something new like that, one of the things that I think we need to encourage more of women is, like, don't be afraid to fail. Like, we have so much there's so much pressure in a way to be like that kind of perfect girl boss, or like you got to do everything perfectly. But no, innovation doesn't happen like perfectly the first time you try something, right? The nature of invention, the nature of getting your Ph.D. Like, these two have an excellent academic pedigree, but there's a lot of experimentation and trying and failing, and like picking at like a subject area that didn't that doesn't quite have enough fruit or enough research area in it, like it doesn't bear enough new research. All that is normal. Failing is part of the process. Nothing great ever happened from being perfect first time. And if you're, yeah.
Yeah, and coming off of that, I have a question for everyone. Is there an idea or thing that you would have wanted to know back in the day? A little bit of advice, adversity advice, or something that you would have done differently had you known hindsight? Can you give a little anecdotal story that for those younger women listening to the podcast, that you can give them a little advice? Whether it be through going through school or starting your career.
I'll start then. Some of the best experiences I've had are when I jumped in with both feet and didn't really know what they were going to bear. During my engineering degree, my undergrad, I decided that I wanted to learn another language besides French, and that I would go on an exchange and do it. And I think back now, it was a huge decision. But in my mind, it was like, well, other people do it, so it can't be that bad. So I literally packed a bag and took off to Germany, learned German 6 weeks before I started classes in mechanical engineering in Germany. But it was like one of the best years of my education. And I kept repeating that. So I kept doing things where I was like, oh yeah, what could go wrong? I'll just jump at that. And they turn out great, especially because you have no expectation really.
Right.
So but yeah, I agree with Beatrice on the learning that failure is okay. And my PhD was riddled with tons and tons of, 5 years of failures, right? Like to get that thing done. But you can't discover anything unless you tried all the things that don't work, right? You have to keep going, persistence, patience.
Exactly. That's really great advice. A lot of people stay in their comfort zones, and you really need to test the waters and realize that it's fun jumping into the unknown once in a while. So,
I think if I can pinpoint, I think that's what
and healthy too. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. Health is an important thing. It's an important word right now. Do things that are healthy. But I would say litigation is probably the experience for me that's really shaped a lot of my thinking about life and myself. Because litigation, you have to be prepared to lose, because it will just happen. You can do everything right to prepare your case. The facts could be on your side, the law could be on your side, but you just get a decision maker that's not feeling it that day, or they hinge on something, that they focus on something that is a particular analytical point for them, and you just lose. And it's very binary when you kind of go into a situation like that. There's A and there's B, and you're usually asking a yes or no question, at least at the early stage. So you kind of get used to the prospect of failing, and doing everything perfectly and yet having the result not go your way, and that's normal. So the more you can get yourself into situations like that, whether it's just for fun, like doing like a side project, trying to start a business on your own with some friends, with no expectations, as Marilyn said, and experiencing, not getting the A, right, or putting pressure on yourself to get the A. Just do it because you like it. That type of thing has been very helpful for me, and I've seen it in others who are, getting outside their comfort zone. That's been very transformative for them too.
Excellent.
Add to that, not to get
For sure.
sidelined by a failure. So this is something that I have discussions with the incoming first year class, that for the first time, you're probably going to fail a test or an exam or not hand in an assignment or something along those lines, and life will go on. That's okay.
Right.
As long as okay, what went wrong? And learn from it and try not to do it again if there were circumstances that were preventable. But it's okay. Like, there were tests that I failed, and I'm now standing in front of you teaching you. Clearly, most of you are gonna make it through. So don't get
I don't believe
sidetracked.
I've ever heard. I don't believe I've ever heard a professor say that at the front of the class. That there was.
Well, I do.
I think they should. I think they should say more. More professors should say something along those lines.
To break down that barrier that I'm not a perfect academic person standing up in front of them. What separates a student and me is just experience and time.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
was
resilience, I would say.
and I wasn't a perfect student.
Yeah, like doggedness is something that we don't talk about. We didn't talk
Grit.
about when I was in school. Yeah, grit. Just like you get knocked down, but it's not the getting knocked down; it's the getting back
Dust
up.
yourself off and get back up again.
So
Absolutely.
Cool.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the OSPE related activities that everyone is doing that's on the call today. So I'm going to start with you, Lauren. Can you talk about your experience on the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, and what work are you involved in, and how do you believe that we're making things better for women in engineering through the task force?
Yeah, so I'm on the task force. I'm a relatively new member to the task force, but so far just an amazing positive experience with wonderful people on the task force. It has basically 3 goals: to recognize some individuals in the engineering community that aren't normally in the spotlight, particularly those that are working to help promote diversity and inclusion. To help the engineering community understand the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and then to try and help provide some tools to succeed. So one of the things that the task force just recently completed was an Engineering for Change leadership series, and there were various topics that were discussed during this series, and I wrote them down, so I am going to refer to them. Building confidence and influence, negotiation, navigating bias, and achieving balance. So we had some really awesome discussions around these topics. And personally, I took away some tips that I hope will help me in the future. Things that we're working on, the task force is working on right now, is a proposal for OSPE's Diversity and Inclusion Award, and also in creating content for the Diversify STEM microlearning site. So the committee is doing some amazing things in the diversity and inclusion space.
It definitely sounds like it.
Yeah, please tune in.
Thanks for sharing. Beatrice, you're part of the Research and Innovation Task Force, and you chair the Data Working Group. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that's all about and how you think it's important for engineers to get involved in advocacy?
For sure. So you're all watching this right now through a live stream that's being broadcast over the internet. And this is all made available because of the data economy. I don't know if folks realize, but our generation of knowledge workers, and not just engineers, but everybody who's working right now, are going to be responsible for setting the standards and developing the norms for how we responsibly innovate data, database technology, right? So I chair a working group called the Data Working Group, and we are going to be putting out a white paper this fall, probably around November-ish. And this has been a bit of a labor of love for me and my team for about a year or so. And what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to stir some conversation in the engineering community about how we can build a brighter future for Ontario and Canada that leverages AI to create jobs and supports existing companies and startups that are leveraging these technologies, but also provides a clear overview of what the current legislative activities have been from the Hill, because that's often a source of great confusion for engineers. Like what is privacy law and what is privacy law in Canada? What is GDPR? How does it all fit in? And so I have a great team, and I'm very proud of them. I'm very excited for the work we're going to do. So tune in. We're going to be asking some informed but neutral questions of us as an engineering community. And we hope that this will spur debate and encourage people to get involved with the Research and Innovation Task Force. Thanks.
Thank you so much for giving us that update. I also have an update, a little infomercial interjection here about how OSPE is bringing industry, academia, government, and engineers together to have these tough discussions at our annual conference to make the profession better for women and other equity-seeking groups. This year's engineering conference is virtual. It's going to happen between October 6th and 7th. Please visit OSPE's website to find out more. And yes, moving right along, this hour has flown right by. Just a few more questions. I would love to ask Marilyn, what advice would you give to young women who want to become engineers?
To go for it and get the degree to get started. And then what you're going to want to do is make sure you have those relationships. Like I said, every great move I've made has been made and enabled because of my network, because I kept talking to people and asking questions, and what was really curious. I didn't sit there and put out a 5-year goal and a 10-year goal. I have goals, but they're not those SMART goals that people talk about, where they're specific and measurable and achievable. They were more general direction. And then I just thought things that felt good throughout that. So starting out and being persistent. I'm also very new to OSPE, and I'm very much amazed and wished I had known it earlier in my career. I was in Quebec for half my career, so I get a little buyout for that because I just got back to Ontario in the last couple of years. So looking at all the great work that OSPE is doing, the task forces that exist, gives you that ability to go across industries. So maybe you're in a specific industry now, but by joining something like OSPE, you'll get to know other people in other industries, and it can allow you to hop industries. I've hopped industries a lot. I went from, aviation into, but it was more like a healthcare, but it was medical education more so. And then I hopped from there into general education and then into college. So all very different sectors. And I wouldn't have been able to make those jumps had it not been for the people I met and sticking my hand up to volunteer. I would volunteer for things that, got me introduced to people that got me, the next opportunity that sounded like it fit with what I was looking for.
Excellent. Does anyone else want to take a stab at this question about giving advice to young women who may want to become engineers in the future?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like that's what this whole hour has been about in a way, but do it for sure. I would say if this panel is any indication, the learning never stops, right? the feeling of should I do that next thing? Should I push my own boundaries and try this next thing? Is a lifelong journey. You never really get there. That's the thing they never tell you. You get the degree first, then you graduate, and then you're there. Okay, and then you get your job, your first job, and you're there. That's a complete myth, right? It's a continuous process. And I think if you embrace it as an adventure, and I can tell you, engineering has opened up like a ton of doors, and even now the jobs that I think will exist when you graduate don't even exist now. That's kind of my read of a lot of things that are happening in private sector, especially with data and cybersecurity. So yeah, jump in. You'll learn some pretty cool skills and meet some pretty amazing people. And what I wanted to ask actually of Marilyn and Lauren as well is like, what makes you excited? What's the new thing that's kind of on the horizon for you that you're excited about innovating for? You know what I mean? Like, what's the new hairy project that you haven't quite got figured out, but kind of gets you excited, but you're not so sure yet if it's something you have totally figured out? What's the thing on your plate currently that is the problem that you're working on?
Thank you so much, by the way, Beatrice. You've been like a second host tonight, asking some hard-hitting questions that I have missed on the list. Absolutely. Continue.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, but the question still stands. Sorry. What are the things that get you guys excited today as sort of examples of projects that you might be, that sort of make you interested to get up and go to work in the morning? What are you working on? If you can say.
What I'm really excited about right now is a new course that I'm developing. It's a completely experiential course. So I've been working on it for the past few months, and it's all about coffee. So using coffee as a tool to teach chemical engineering and to synthesize some of those concepts that it's an upper year technical elective, but synthesize some of those concepts in the second and third year learning, things about doing grind size, affecting mass transfer, affecting reaction rate, the temperature that you brew your coffee at, and how that affects the rate of extraction. So using coffee as an experiential teaching tool. And
I totally want to take that course.
Yeah.
So every single class we get to do something like physically and taste the coffee at the end. So we can literally taste the class and taste our learning.
That's great, because that coffees are the way that you meet new people. It sort of ties everything that we talked about together in terms of networking and finding those mentors and those sponsors.
Yeah, and for me, for chemical engineering, I know a lot of people traditionally think of it as the oil and gas engineering. And chemical engineering to me is not that. It can be that, but it is so much more. And so this also opens up some of our students' eyes to opportunities in engineering that maybe they weren't thinking about. So when I talk to students about engineering, in particular chemical engineering, I talk about the non-traditional types that range from coffee and from food and from the cannabis industry right now to cosmetics and so on. And it's quite a broad and diverse industry and lots of opportunities for lots of different people.
Well, you're going to have to hold that information close to the chest there, because you're going to find yourself with a room full of people auditing that class that have no business.
Yes, the number of people that have asked me if they can audit the class is crazy. It's mostly colleagues.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yes, thank you so much for that. We're going to move into our final question of the evening. I know it's over already. I've had an excellent time hosting you guys, and this has been an excellent conversation. I want to ask the question, why are you an Ospie member? And we're going to go Lauren, then Beatrice, then Marilyn.
Being an Ospie member shows my support for the organization, and it also allows me a way to contribute to some of those issues that Ospie advocates for and that align with my own values and goals.
Great. Beatrice?
The people. Apart from putting up with my lack of respect for decorum, they are just so much fun. There's folks who volunteer their time to get involved in something like this, as Marilyn alluded to, are generally really friendly people who want to give of their time and give back to the community and learn. It just creates this really cool ecosystem that I think is the best of what any community should be. So yeah, come join OSPE. Come for the learning possibly, and stay for the friends, I would say.
I love that. Yes, come for the learning, stay for the friends and the networking and so the reason I'm an OSPE member is really to be part of the profession. I've been a lone engineer for much of my career, where I'm the only engineer at the table, and it's great to find out what other engineers are up to sometimes. And even in my role right now, and in my past roles in the past few years, I had the same title as people who, they come from very different backgrounds than engineering. So it's nice being able to meet with people, and I think engineering is so diverse. It's so hard. We can talk about what does a doctor do, and everybody, even when they're a kid, they can kind of figure that out. They can figure out some other professions, but an engineer is so diverse, and people end up in such wildly different industries and doing such different things that OSPE is the place where you can kind of call yourself an engineer and find out what other people are doing and get that sort of feeling that there's a profession there.
Thank you so much for participating, all of you, in today's proceedings. And I know that you've inspired those watching with your commentary and banter back and forth on all things to do with engineering and the future. And thank you again for joining. And thank you at home for joining us on this special live podcast recording of Engineering the Future. Thank you to Dr. Marilyn Powers, Beatrice Sze, and Dr. Lauren Briens. They are all professional engineers and are proud OSPE members. Happy International Women's Day in Engineering. And tune in for I hope you tune in again for another episode. And this was great.
From all of us at OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, thanks for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.